Hey, what's up guys? Also Football Talk here, back with another weekly NFL preview video. Didn't have the greatest week 3, going 9-8 overall in my straight picks after 12-4 week before that. Picking the wrong upset after saying the Bengals and Dolphins would both keep the games tight and had a chance to win, even though I did say I only liked Miami if they had Tua. On this week 4 slate, we have quite a few divisional games and some interesting storylines to follow, with the biggest one already being on the screen here basically. But once again, we pay attention to all 16 matchups, break down each team a little bit with some key stats, explain how the two teams match up schematically and personnel-wise, and give you my predictions. Please bear in mind that I record this on Wednesday already and don't have the full injury report yet, of course, plus the betting lines that are listed at the bottom are still subject to change, of course, as well, as money comes in on these games. Since I want to make this a weekly thing and have to work a normal job as well, I just can't spend hours every week writing this whole thing up and then editing the video. So instead I decided to just write a little intro, then blabber about these games with a couple of key stats that I wrote down for every team and just go about this whole thing. But let's dive right in here with Thursday Night Football, where we have the 0-3 Jacksonville Jaguars traveling to Cincinnati to take on the 2-1 Bengals. Bengals favored by 7.5, total set at 45.5. And this is a game that I thought could be one of the more fun ones to watch when the schedule came out between two up-and-coming teams and the number one picks of the last two drafts. This is the first time we've seen Cincinnati with a winning record in a while, with the one loss surprisingly coming to the Bears team that just had one of the worst showings of the season at Cleveland, going up against the Jacksonville team that had at least their most competitive half this past Sunday against the now 3-0 Cardinals, and actually led at halftime thanks to an incredible 109-yard kick 6 with zeros on the clock, until they lost the second half 27-6 unfortunately. Last week, what I like to see from the Jaguars is take some pressure off their first overall pick, Trevor Lawrence. Actually, I think doubled basically James Robinson's carries on the season with 15. And you saw them really get that ground game going, to establish some balance on this offense. And then defensively, they made some big plays, got that big interception by Andrew Wingard off Kyler Murray, which is actually the first turnover forced on the season. And one thing that really stands out here, they're starting drives from their own 23-yard line inside that actually, which is the worst mark in the league, and that certainly doesn't help when you have a sputtering offense to some degree, and the defense just can't really stop anybody, so then you're losing that field position battle. For the Bengals, on the other hand, the defense may not scare anybody, but they're actually owning the line of scrimmage, and they're allowing just 3.1 yards per carry, as well as averaging 6 tackles for loss a game. Offensively, with that trio of Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, and Jamar Chase, that is one of the more lethal young groups that you have in the entire league, I believe, showing some good balance and a real plan offensively overall. But when I look at how these two teams match up against each other, I really believe the Bengals have an advantage on both sides of the ball at the line of scrimmage, where defensively they're not going to allow the Jaguars to really get that ground game going. And then on offense, I think they at least can keep Joe Burrow clean. They want to get the ball out quickly anyway, even if they take some deep shots. Where if Burrow sees Jamar Chase, even with a guy, he's just going to trust his man, put the ball out in front, let him win it at the catch point, and that's just the style of play that they have right now. While I just believe that they also have more firepower offensively than the Jaguars, even if Trevor Lawrence has that big arm where he can make those big time throws and he's flashed it to some degree. But that transition to the NFL hasn't been as smooth as one either, as he leads the entire league with 9 giveaways. And I just think with the Bengals, some of the things that they can do on the back end, being able to force this team to be one-dimensional and put it all on Lawrence, they're going to be able to jump some routes and get a couple more picks probably off him. So when I look at this line, I just didn't want to really lay a touchdown and the hook with the Bengals here, but I just don't know really what the Jaguars are doing better at this point. So give me the Bengals 27-16, and I could easily see the score being a little closer. But as I mentioned, give me the area where you think the Jaguars are really more scary than the Bengals. I don't really see it. And that brings us to the Sunday slate with the 1 p.m. games. And the first one we have here is the Tennessee Titans at 2-1, traveling to the Jets at 0-3. Titans favored by 7.5, over under set at 46. Tennessee has been one of the least impressive 2-1 squads, I would say, which still has a point differential of -13, thanks to that no-show performance against the Cardinals in the season opener, going up against arguably the worst team we've seen so far, which is indicated by also the worst point differential league-wide at -50 for the Jets. So in the end, the touchdown plus the hook for the Titans on the road here is probably about right from putting together the line. While the total may present some value here, and I'll get to that in a little bit, But for the Titans offensively, Derrick Henry, even after a slow start, he leads the league in rushing once again. The issue for the offense has been that they are tied with the Jets for the second most giveaways with 7. And A.J. Brown, he's now week to week with a hamstring injury. While defensively, I just really don't trust this team yet. Completely overhauled secondary and hasn't been able to swing the turnover differential in their favor at all either, as they have just forced one themselves. And for the Jets, if you want to know just how bad they've been, they're obviously at the bottom of the league in terms of points scored. But the second closest team, which is the Bears, they have still scored twice as many points as they had 20 in the season for the Jets. And it took Chicago to actually just give up 9 sacks to the Browns to match New York's season total of 15. So projecting this matchup forward, when I look at the Jets, I think the one thing that they can show some resistance against the Titans here is I don't really see a monster game for Derrick Henry in this one, just because the Jets have size up front, slow on the run game, but I'm not really sure how they're going to cover Julio Jones. That is still a major issue for them on the outside of the corner position, where they're not going to be able to match him one-on-one, obviously. Not having A.J. Brown for the Titans definitely hurts, where now the Jets are going to be able to bracket Julio to some degree or just roll coverage that way. Well, if we turn this thing around, Zach Wilson, the rookie quarterback for the Jets, he's obviously not at the greatest start to his career. But just looking at this matchup, I think he could be getting back on track to some degree here against the bad Titans secondary that I obviously still have questions about. So I actually project him to match their season total just in this game of 20 points. But unfortunately for the Titans side here, I see them really keeping that ball going as well. Julio Jones, he's kind of re-emerged now, and the offense has started rolling. So give me them scoring 10 points more, which makes them the winner of this game 30-20. So the line, I'm not sure if I want to lay 7.5 here with the Titans, but the over-under, it could present some value here, because I understand if you don't want to really bet with the Jets here, and that's not what I'm doing, because I still have the Titans covering, but I think this is a pretty low total for a game where we have two really bad defenses going up against each other, and that's just what I'll be looking at. If the line starts going down even a little more, I might be hitting the over here. Which has us moving on to a game with a much higher over-under, and that's the Kansas City Chiefs of 1-2, going to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, also at that 1-2 record. Chiefs favored by 7 points. The total set at 54.5. You have Andy Reid going back to Philadelphia, and this is a battle of 1-2 teams, which one of them we certainly did not expect to be at this point, as the kings of the AFC and the Chiefs are bleeding right now, being sort of a fourth quarter collapse for the Browns away from actually being winless at this point. While the Eagles have steadily been falling off from a domination against the Falcons, followed by a good fight against the 49ers that they put up, but ultimately lost, and then a really bad loss to the Cowboys on Monday night, where they showcased issues in all 3 facets of the game. For the Chiefs' offense, we've seen opposing teams use a lot more too high safety, soft zone shells, where they really force this offense to go underneath, but somehow the Chiefs still only have 3 teams ahead of them in yards per play, and they convert a league high 55.2% of their third down attempts. What's been killing them has just been turnovers with 6 of them. The defense, on the other hand, has allowed 95 points through 3 games. That is tied with the freaking Lions for the most in the league, while their 7 yards per play allowed is also the worst mark in the NFL. On the Eagles side, Jalen Hurts, he did have a really strong showing in week 1, where they were able to throw a lot of screens and get him involved as a runner. But at this point, there's 25 other starters that average more intended air yards than him. And defensively, you're looking at the injury to Brandon Graham. That's obviously big, one of their big leaders. While they just haven't been very disciplined, surrendering a league high 12 first downs via penalty, and the offense has also been flagged more than any other team in the league. So as I look at this matchup, there's really 2 things that stand out to me from a Chiefs perspective, the advantages that they have. First, defensively, Eagles playing a lot of those quarters coverages, where the middle of the field is there to attack, which is going to be an issue with all the RPOs the Kansas City wants to run, and especially Travis Kelce. He's a major mismatch against those Philly linebackers, which have the issues in coverage. And then when we flip things around, Jalen Hurts and his offense for the Eagles, which is rather simple, I would say, going up against Steve Spagnuolo, who's one of the best at game planning against sort of one-dimensional offenses that don't offer much creativity, which I haven't really seen with the Eagles, kind of the same approach that we see with the Kansas City Chiefs, and Spags is going to be locked in on that one. I think just from those 2 things, the Chiefs have the advantage, while just being the more talented team and the more capable offensively for sure, with Patrick Mahomes pulling the trigger. I see this as a major bounce back spot for the Chiefs team and easily covering the spread as they win this game 34-21. Eagles keep falling off and really look more like the team that I projected them to be ahead of the season. They showed early on when they are healthy up front that they can kick some ass there, but they just aren't already anymore, and that's kind of what I expected just because I haven't seen them stay healthy for a full season. So I'm going with a 13-point win by the Chiefs. And that brings us to a next matchup with the Dallas Cowboys at 2-1, hosting the 3-0 Carolina Panthers. Cowboys now favored by 4.5. Deadline has moved a little bit their way, and the total is set at 50.5. And in this one, we have a somewhat surprisingly still undefeated Panthers team going up against the Cowboys squad that may have a few questions still, but could easily be 3-0 at this point, with the season opener at Tampa down to a last-second field goal by the reigning Super Bowl champs. Just on the surface, we have one of the most explosive offenses for Dallas, going up against what has been the best defense in the league statistically for the Panthers. So something has to give here in this matchup, it seems like. For the Panthers, they did have that convincing win at Houston last week on Thursday night and had a long week now to recover. But unfortunately, with those injuries that they suffered, Christian McCaffrey, he's going to be out for a few weeks. JC Horn, he's going to be out for at least a couple of months, it seems like. So they're without a top 10 pick at the corner position, their best guy at that position already. And their feature piece on offense in Christian McCaffrey, who's accounted for 42.5% of the yardage output through the first 2 weeks. That connection between Donald and DJ Moore has been strong, and that's something that they'll try to keep on working. While defensively, Carolina is now only second in scoring defense, with 30 points allowed so far in the season, but they're still number 1 in yards per play, first downs surrendered, third down percentage, and total pressures. So they're still fine. The Cowboys, on the other hand, have been moving the ball on everybody so far, it seems like. They've picked up the league high 82 first downs on the season, and they have 5 different skill position players with over 140 scrimmage yards. Defensively is where they have really shown some improvement in some areas, as some of those young players have come along and really developed. DeMarcus Lawrence, he's obviously out for several weeks still, but the two things that really stand out here, they're top 10 red zone defense, and they forced a league high in 8 turnovers. So those two things combined with the offense make them a dangerous team. And they didn't really need to be a dominant defense, just needed to improve on that side of the ball, and they certainly have, it looks like. If this was the line, and the Carolina Panthers had everybody healthy, I would certainly be betting on them. But right now, they're just banged up. Christian McCaffrey, we just don't know how they're going to replace him. Chuba Hubbard, the rookie, he's somebody who has an explosive skill set. But in terms of a dual threat running back, he's not nearly the type of threat that we have in Christian McCaffrey at this point. Well, on the other side, with the Cowboys, they're not just taking deep shots down the field and moving the ball with those big plays. They can actually put together some long drives where Dak gets the ball out quickly, and they're really going to expose those matchups on the outside, which is where I see some issues for Carolina here, because CeeDee Lamb, Mari Cooper, they don't really have anybody who match up with those guys, which whether they're playing man coverage or quarters, which they like to run, there's still going to be some one-on-ones on the outside, and this is really where I see a disadvantage for Carolina here. From a coaching perspective, I definitely give the Panthers the advantage with Joe Brady offensively and Phil Snow on defense, where I could see them manufacture some pressures here with Brian Burns and company, get a free rusher in Dak's face. But with the way that they want to get the ball out, I think they can neutralize it to some degree. So I'm going to say that the Cowboys win this one 27-23. Should be a really entertaining game, and this should be a very entertaining matchup between two of the top units respectively going up against each other. I just think for the Cowboys, they have that explosiveness that I don't quite see with the Panthers, especially with having C-Mac out. So I have them not quite covering and right around the total. Nothing that really stands out from a betting perspective. But give them the Cowboys here, winning by just over a field goal. And that brings us to the New Orleans Saints at 2-1, traveling to New York to take on the 0-3 Giants. Saints favored by 7.5, over-under set at 43.5. Maybe we can't be totally sure which Saints we get on a weekly basis, where they blow out the Packers in week 1, then get overwhelmed by Carolina after that, before going up to New England and out-executing them for pretty much the whole game, I thought. New York, on the other hand, just has not been able to win games, even though they've had leads in all 3 of them, and lost on field goals these last 2 weeks. And just for full transparency, I had the Giants winning 1 more game than the Saints in my full season predictions, so I'm probably wrong already, even if I still see the talent on the Giants. I thought that they would be one of the better defenses in all of football, but they've been very disappointing on that side of the ball. I think about average statistically now, but going up against a Falcons offense that has had its issues as well, that definitely helps from a statistical standpoint. And offensively, I think average fits the bill pretty well too. Whereas Daniel Jones, I don't think has really been the issue here. For the Saints, on the other hand, they've kind of been riding that roller coaster that is Jameis Winston so far. Offensively, overall, only 3 teams have averaged less yards per play, while the defense has been stellar, coming up with a couple of huge turnovers at New England last week, and right now they're tied for second with 7 takeaways overall in the season. When I look at this matchup, I think the Giants have some things to give the Saints trouble here, because what the Saints really want to do is own the line of scrimmage and establish a run. Because what the Saints really want to do is own the line of scrimmage, dictate games to some degree, which with the Giants, they have some big bodies up front to control the line of scrimmage and make this team one-dimensional, where then they have the guys in the secondary to trouble what the Saints have on the outside, kind of limit at the wide receiver position, to where you force Jameis Winston now to hold on to the ball and make some big decisions. That could become an issue. On the other side of the ball, the Saints have been one of the better defenses, so I don't want to say that the Giants will be able to move the ball on them consistently, but Daniel Jones presents an element as a runner where they play a lot of man coverage, and now where you have Danny Dimes, as everybody runs with their guys, he has a big lane up front and can take advantage of that. Just think back to the Eagles game last year, where Jalen Hurts had a big day on the ground against them. And as much as I love Sean Payton, one of the best offensive play callers in NFL history, I like Patrick Graham on the other side of the ball. I'm still a believer in the things that he does. And like I just explained, with Jameis Winston putting the game in his hands, doing some creative things on the back end and showing a lot of different rotations in coverage, where you can maybe get a couple of interceptions off him, get your offense some short fields, and them actually cashing in for once. That could really be the difference here. And I'm already hating myself for this, but I picked the Giants winning 22-20 in this one. My one big upset of the week, I would say. This is obviously a bold take, going up against a Saints team that just kind of dominated the game at New England to some degree, against a Giants team that's had major issues so far. But I really think that they can iron those out. But I still believe we could see this Giants defense be one of the better ones league-wide and kind of bounce back and get their first win of the season. And let's see where the thing goes. With that, let's move along to the Cleveland Browns at 2-1, going to Minnesota to take on the 1-2 Vikings. Browns are up by 2, total set at 53 points. And in this one, we have clearly one of the 3 most impressive AFC teams, I would say, for the Browns, which could be undefeated by now if they found a way to bring home that 9-point lead in the 4th quarter at Kansas City, while the Vikings were staring at 0-3 when they were down 17-7 at home against the Seahawks, but put together a great second half and might have saved the season to some degree here. With 86 and 87 points scored respectively so far, we should definitely see those scoreboards get a good day of work. Last week I already said that Cleveland to me had a top 5 roster in the NFL, and we went into that believing on Sunday against the Bears that they're gonna be able to move the ball at will, which was kind of the case, but more impressively their defense really showed out, sacking Justin Fields 9 times in his rookie debut and holding Chicago to just 1 net passing yard. For the Vikings, the offense has not been the problem, with Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator, keeping the ball rolling, whether it's Dalvin Cook, Alexander Mattison, doesn't really matter. They have success in the ground game, and then you have those 2 stud receivers with Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson off play action streaking free, where they are really good at sustaining drives. But on the flip side, defensively, only one team has allowed more yards per play and missed more tackles than Minnesota, which seems kind of weird for a Mike Zimmer coach defense, but they have certainly had their issues, especially in the secondary. Bashar Breeland in the corner has been one of the biggest liabilities in the entire league. So this should definitely be an entertaining game from an offensive perspective. The Browns now have Odell Beckham Jr. coming back, their one true alpha weapon in the pass game, who they can hit off play action with those deep shots, especially if they can get Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt going in the ground game. While Minnesota, they also bring that balanced approach where they're not going to make it easy for the Browns to really know what's coming. But when I look at this Cleveland defense, some of the things that they've shown when they can get into obvious passing situations against Kirk Cousins, and they've been stopping the run fairly well, that could be an issue for the Vikings. In terms of the offensive line, both teams have one alpha pass rusher, with Myles Garrett on the Browns side, and then Danielle Hunter, he's kind of been re-emerging from Minnesota. But offensive line definitely goes to the Browns, and now you're looking at Minnesota in those 3rd and long situations, put the game on Kirk Cousins. I see there being some issues, and the Browns pulling away here late. Give me them winning 20-24, covering that spread right around the total number. I'm not touching that, but I certainly like the Browns in this spot to at least win the game on the money line. And with that, let's move on to other NFC North teams, as we have the 0-3 Lions going to Chicago to take on the 1-2 Bears. We have arguably the most try-hard team in the NFL with the Lions, which have found ways to compete against the 49ers, Packers and Ravens for the majority of those games, to their credit, even though those are arguably all Super Bowl contenders, but their lack of talent on the roster has also been apparent to some degree. While for the Bears, they're coming off maybe the most disgusting display of offensive football that I've seen in years, and now if people are in Chicago calling for Matt Nagy's head after what he did to his dynamic rookie quarterback Justin Fields, and now their one win over the Bengals seems kind of like an outlier at this point. Detroit has been a top 10 rushing offense according to multiple metrics, and when they've been able to play a balanced brand of football offensively, they've been pretty good, but game script has definitely not been in their favor, having to climb back into games late, which of course is challenging when your defense is at the very bottom in yards per pass play, passer rating, and points allowed overall. For the Bears, their offense has just been dreadful yet again. Their 3.3 yards per play is by far the lowest mark league-wide, with the next closest actually being at 4, and they actually average half a yard less per dropback than per play, so that's kind of a crazy statistic as well. Defensively, they've had a few flashes with that Roquan Smith pick 6 against the Bengals, and the pass rush getting home a couple of times on Baker Mayfield last week, but they've also been vulnerable to some big plays, so there's definitely less people tuning into this game, unless they're from Detroit or Chicago, because people like offense, and we have the worst defense in the league going up against the worst offense in the league. So one of these two units has to step up, and I like Justin Fields here to bounce back to some degree. No freaking clue what Matt Nagy was doing last week with Bill Lace and that offensive game plan. I just want to see one of those guys take the reins here, formulate the game plan around Justin Fields, get him involved in the option run game, get the ball out of his hands, not let him hold on to the ball and make decisions. That was just a freaking shit show last week. For the Lions, like I said, when they can sustain some drives where they're running the ball and then throwing off play action, get Jared Goff comfortable, that is where they can have some success. So this is really going to come down to how much can they stop DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams from establishing a ground game and forcing the defense to play alert to that as well. Because once again, Goff is one of those guys, when you put the game on him, he's going to have his struggles, especially at Chicago, at Social Field, depending on how the weather is. We saw it against the Packers where he had some issues handling the ball. Unfortunately, didn't look up the weather forecast, but just keep that in mind if you actually do bet on the game and you hear some reports about it. This is a game from a betting perspective that I just wouldn't touch because I have it landing pretty much exactly at those numbers. Since I have the Bears winning 23-20, should be another very close game and one that the Lions can actually win on a schedule that at this point looks like even if they keep on fighting, they're going to have a tough time finding those W's. But given the Bears here getting back into the winner column, and at 2-2, some of that noise will die down if that's where they get to. And I want to see Justin Fields keep on going. Please, none of this crap about Nick Foles or any of that. Just want to see the rookie out there, see what you have in him. And with that, let's move on to the Houston Texans at 1-2, traveling to Buffalo, taking the 2-1 Bills. Biggest spread of the week by far, actually by 9 points, I believe. Bills are favored by 16.5, total set at 48 points. And similar to the Lions, the Texans have been a very competitive team, but the difference for them has been that they faced a very bad team week 1 in the Jacksonville Jaguars, which they got a relatively easy W off. And now they're playing a rookie quarterback who is certainly not in that tier with Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, those guys. The Bills, on the other hand, had a head-scratching performance week 1 against the Steelers, but have been the best team in all of football these last 2 weeks for my money, winning by a combined margin of 47 points. For Houston, the one guy I want to point out here is Brandon Cooks, who had another big game against Carolina, which I projected to be the one guy to actually do something against them, now averaging 107 receiving yards per game. Davis Mills did look solid in his first start, but from a play calling perspective, I want to see them get the ball out more, get him some of those easy looks to get him comfortable. Defensively, the Texans have been somewhat surprising to me, as they're about average league-wide across the board, but the 33 missed tackles is the highest number league-wide. And the one really good offense that they faced in the Browns They crossed that 30-point mark. For the Bills, Josh Allen finally back in MVP form on Sunday, accounting for 5 touchdowns against this Washington team. He's just a true game changer and has the pieces, the weapons around him to facilitate an offense that should only get better from this point on. The more encouraging side of the ball, however, for the Bills has actually been the defense, which ranked first in tackles for loss, third in total pressures and yards per play. And something that really stands out here when I look at their stats, they're starting drives from their own 35 on average, which is the best mark in the NFL. So you work into some short fields, the defense gets in the opposing backfield. Those are some things that you see from a winning team who right now is playing as well as any other one in the AFC probably. I'm not 100% sure about the status of Tyrod Taylor, but I believe at least this week he will still sit out. So we'll see some more action of Davis Mills, who, like I mentioned, had a solid debut. But now he's going up against the tough Bills defense that we've seen, which has those fresh young pass rushes, rotating them in and out, where they're going to create some issues, put some pressure on the rookie, and force him to make some bad decisions. While on the back end, with Trey White and those guys in zone coverage, just lurking, looking to jump some routes, those could mean a couple of turnovers for Mills here. While on the other side of the ball, I just don't see how the Texans can keep the Bills under 30 points. You just saw DJ Moore really light them up. Now project Stephon Diggs in that role, and even if they kind of bracket him or try to use more pieces in the secondary against him, they have other playmakers. Emmanuel Sanders showing out last week, Cole Beasley in the slot, Dawson Knox at the tight ends, getting more involved, and really showing some improvement as well. This is a huge spread. Actually was at 17.5 at some point as well. And I barely have the Bills covering here with 17 points, winning 34-17 overall. So that number with the spreads, I'm not touching. But the total, or at least the Bills team total, might be some things that I'll be looking to if we get it around that 30 number. The Texans have been hanging around in most of these games. But this is, like I said, one of the elite teams in that conference. And I don't see how they can really keep up in this game. And with that, let's move on to the 0-3 Colts, going to Miami to take on the 1-2 Dolphins. Miami favored by 1.5, over-under set at 43. And if we had actually looked at the schedule before the year kicked off, we would have seen that both these teams had very tough starts to the season. But I don't think anybody would have said that after the first 3 weeks, they would have a combined 1 win, since they both won 10 last year themselves. And if not for a special teams touchdown, the Colts would have scored 17 or less in 3 straight weeks, while the Dolphins had scored the fewest points over the first 2 and didn't score any of extended drives last week until they got into desperation mode at Las Vegas late. So right off the bat, I'm looking at a low total of 43 and still think it might be too high. But let's dive into this matchup. And the Colts have arguably the most disappointing team in the entire league, now 0-3, considering some people thought that they would challenge the Titans for the AFC South title. They're below average on the ground offensively. Carson Wentz is getting pressured on the third of the snaps nearly, and they have just not been able to turn things around with Wentz. Defensively, they have been stopping the run fairly well if it isn't Derrick Henry, but they've been suspect in the pass game, allowing a pass rating of just below 120 and recording a league low 12 total pressures for 3 games. For the Dolphins, their offense had those 2 gutsy drives late against the Raiders last week, but they're still bottom 3 in total points, yards per play, and points added per drive. The fact that Jalen Waddle, a player who averaged over 19 yards per catch at Alabama, just caught 12 passes for 58 yards on Sunday, kind of tells the whole story, and that included one in the end zone for a safety, which was one of the weirdest plays I've ever seen. Defensively, to see them allow opponents to convert a league-high 59% of the third down attempts is also kind of shocking, to be honest, considering they have the personnel in the secondary to match up against the other team's offensive weaponry. So this is a huge game for both these teams, which are kind of staring at the brink of elimination already, it seems like. With Jacoby Brissett making another start because Tua's out at least until week 6, I believe. Going up against his former team, Indianapolis Colts, who now have a bit of a quarterback issue themselves with Carson Wentz. Just not being able to get out of his own way. He's already been banged up with those 2 ankles and just making some bad decisions while also being pressured. So really what I see here in Miami's favor is that they can do some things on the back end to make things hard for Wentz, where he's not going to know where the free rush is coming from with all the different zero blitzes. And Indy doesn't really have the weaponry offensively to challenge what they have in coverage, really make them pay for playing all that man coverage. With Michael Pittman Jr. in the second year, he's made a big jump and looking good, but he's really the only weapon that they have that kind of scares teams. And what the Dolphins do here, if they keep that one safety high, kind of shading that way, that is something that they can do to kind of offset that if they did have an advantage here at the position there. While on the other side of the ball, for the Dolphins, their biggest issue has been the offensive line, not being able to protect the quarterback as well to some degree, which won't be as big of an issue here, with the Colts just not having shown anything in the pass rush department to scare opposing teams. While Brissett is somebody who's gonna push the ball vertically and challenge this team, which has some issues in the secondary, as I mentioned. So both these teams off to bad starts. I still believe that Miami is the one that can turn things around, and I've them winning 23-19 here, covering that spread, coming in just below that number, 1 point below that total that is projected for right now. So I'd have to see that number creeping up a little bit to get involved, but definitely a game that I'll look at not being a lot of points that are going to be scored here. And that brings us to the last game here of the 1 p.m. slate, with the Washington football team at 1-2 going to Atlanta to take on the also 1-2 Falcons. Washington favored by 1.5, total set at 48 points. And you can argue that Washington should be 0-3 right now, after having gotten that second shot at the game-winning field goal by the Giants when they jumped offside. And they have some issues, but on Sunday I just think that they kind of ran into a buzzsaw at Buffalo, and I don't think that's totally representative of who they are. The Falcons, on the other hand, now have the same record, which is exactly why I wanted to make the disclaimer, because I didn't think they were the better team on Sunday, and they were outscored by 49 points through the first 2 weeks. They are at home, however, and probably are feeling better about themselves just based off the last week. Washington has done a good job of protecting the quarterback with just 3 sacks on the season, tied for the fewest league-wide, but they just haven't been able to stay on the field, converting a league-low 26.5% of the third down attempts. Defensively has been a big disappointment, however, as only one other team has allowed more than the 77 first downs on the season, and opposing teams are scoring on nearly 60% of the drives against them, which is easily the worst mark in the league. Look at the Falcons, I don't really know which side of the ball is more troublesome for them, because they did get lit up for 5 touchdowns by Brady, and Philadelphia seemingly kind of moved the ball at will on them in week 1. But when we look at what the perception of people was, I think the offense has been a bigger disappointment, because they have those big names with Matt Ryan, Calvin Ridley, the rookie Kyle Pitts, where there were some expectations, but you can see Matt Ryan's arm, it's kind of shot, and he should have actually been picked off by the Giants. Adoree Jackson dropping that easy interception in the end zone that would have won them the game. And right now they're bottom 5 in yards per play and percentage of drives ending in scores, while not having had a single play of 40 plus yards yet. So the scary part for Washington, they play a lot of 2-deep coverages, where they leave that middle of the field wide open, and when you have a veteran quarterback like Matt Ryan, he's going to know to some degree how to take advantage of that. Especially Kyle Pitts, he could have a big day in this one. I would hope Ron Rivera looks himself in the mirror and understands that they have to change things up a little bit defensively, not be quite as vanilla, because I believe if they force the quarterback to hold onto the ball, that pass rush against the offensive line the Falcons have some issues in protection there. That could really work in their favor. And then when we flip things around, Taylor Heineke, he's looked pretty good for Washington, going up against a defense that I don't really know what to make of. Can't really make a team one-dimensional, stop the run or the pass game, where I expect a nice balanced approach, Antonio Gibson getting involved, him carrying the ball 20 plus times potentially, and then some shots of play action when you get those corners one-on-one on the outside. Even though both these teams are 1-2, I think there's a big gap in between there where Washington, they've had some issues and they need to iron some things out schematically, like I said. But I think overall still a talent on the roster and the potential that they have as a team. I'm going to definitely give them the nod here. And I have them winning 26-20. So covering that spread, coming in 2 points below the total number. Not something that I'd be looking to. Maybe the under is in play if the total rises a little bit. But I think Washington's certainly a better team among the two. And with that, let's move on to the midday slate. Starting with the Seattle Seahawks at 1-2, going to the San Francisco 49ers at 2-1. 49ers favored by 2.5. Total set at 52 points. And this has been an awesome rivalry for the last decade almost now, even though the Hawks have been the more consistent between the two teams over that stretch. 2 years ago, we saw each team win at the other team's place in some big games. And then last year, when the Niners were kind of wounded, Seahawks kind of manhandled them in their first matchup, but then the Niners gave them hell in the second one. Despite, like I said, being injured in multiple fronts, The feeling about the Seahawks is certainly not what we had after winning by multiple scores at Indianapolis in Week 1. The feeling about the Seahawks is certainly not what we had after winning by multiple scores at Indianapolis in Week 1, twice giving up double-digit leads to the Titans and Vikings. For San Francisco, they just suffered a heartbreaking loss at home on a last-second Green Bay field goal, but I think I've shown that they are for real once again. For the Seahawks offense, they're still easily number 1 in the league with 7.4 yards per play, but it's very feast and famine, where they have those big shots down the field, but can't really move the ball consistently, I would say. And that certainly doesn't match well with a defense that's allowing a league-high 84 first downs, and therefore they have the lowest time of possession in the league at below 24 minutes. For the San Francisco 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, when he can really dictate games, and we've seen that Jimmy G looking serviceable, that's a little bit of an illusion, and I still hope that we see Trey Lance at some point. But right now, they get the job done. Nothing that really stands out statistically, but there's still 16 points added per drive. Defensively, they have one major hole at the cornerback position. Now that Jason Verrett got hurt and lost for the season in Week 1, unfortunately once again, the Packers heavily targeting Devontae Adams, doing whatever they wanted it seemed like, because they just didn't have anybody to match up with him. And some of you may remember that pick 6 by Drake Greenlaw in Week 1 against the Lions, but that still remains the only takeaway in the season. With the Seahawks' inability to get off the field defensively, I see Shanahan putting together a game plan with those long extended drives where they just keep on chipping away before he calls up the kill shot at some point to George Kittle or Brandon Ayuk down the field. Well, when we flip things around, that's where I have the issue with the 49ers. On the outside, those corner positions against Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, that can be a scary thing. That if the Seahawks just get that ground game going a little bit, and the Niners haven't been great against the run, when they can get those one-on-ones with those corners on the outside, that's going to be a major issue for them. So this is really what I see, kind of exactly what we've seen so far, where the Seahawks can get a couple of big plays just because they have the advantages personnel-wise, while the 49ers are going to be the more consistent team, moving the ball offensively and kind of dictating the game script. So the way I see this, Seahawks up 24-23 with about 5 minutes remaining, and San Francisco gets the ball back. Shanahan puts together a killer drive where they take down the entire clock this time, not leave half a minute on the clock for the opposing team's quarterback to kind of make it all worth nothing and kick that game-winning field goal with time running out. So give me the 49ers winning 26-24. And we move directly into the other NFC West matchup with the 3-0 Cardinals going to the Rams, who are also 3-0. Rams here up by 6, over under set at 54.5. Looking past the kind of historical significance of this 2010s in this matchup that I just discussed with the Niners and the Seahawks, these two right now might be the better teams in the NFC West, which records don't lie. The Cardinals just didn't wake up until the second half at Jacksonville, but they have now scored over 30 points in each week, with Kyler Murray looking like the most unstoppable player in the NFL, although they did really struggle at Jacksonville when I rewatched that game, while the Rams just beat the reigning Super Bowl champs by double digits, and to me are the prime contenders to challenge the Bucs for the conference this year, from what I've seen so far at least, and I could see this be the final battle between undefeated teams this season. For the Rams, they have scored on a league-high 58.6% of their drives, and average an NFL-high 9.4 yards per dropback offensively, while also being tied for the fewest sacks allowed with only 3. The one concerning number for the offense has been the rushing attack, as only one team averages less than the 3.3 yards per run. The defense may not have looked as dominant or brilliantly coached at this point, but it just helped the Bucs to 24 points, and have the pieces to match up with pretty much anybody, which is really what it comes down to, especially with the offense being so much more explosive. While for the Cardinals, they are tied with Tampa Bay for the most points scored with 103, and Kyler Murray has kind of been lighting this league on fire, completing more than 2/3 of his passes and accounting for 10 total touchdowns so far. The defense has been good for the most part as well, even though Chandler Jones' 5-sack outburst in Week 1 was probably more of an outlier, but they are now tied for second with 7 takeaways, and they're also second to only the Panthers in third down percentage at only 25.7%. So these really are arguably the two most explosive offenses in the league. If you maybe take away Tampa Bay and Kansas City, when they're totally right, they can really match up with anybody. When you look at the matchup that these two teams had last season, I remember Aaron Donald and his defense really been all over Kyler Murray, not letting him escape the pocket, with those guys on the edges taking those wide angles, and forcing him to step up into the pocket and make plays from within it, which is something that has me worried. But the pass protection for Arizona has been better, and there's a little more creativity on the offensive side of the ball overall from Cliff Kingsbury. But when we flip things around, Arizona last season had their bigger issues against the running back position, where Cam Akers had a couple of big games against them. He's not going to be available, and maybe even Darrell Henderson is going to be out once again. So for the Rams, just that inability to run the ball, have the balance offensively, could make things easier for a defense that is very well coached under Vance Joseph, changing the picture pre to post snap, and maybe they can catch Matt Stafford being a tick slow on realizing what they're doing. Unfortunately, once again, I see a bit of an issue on the outside that Arizona has been able to mask, but at the cornerback position, when you have Byron Murphy, you have him in the slot, that's going to be a really interesting matchup. Him against Cooper Kupp, who has been one of the blazing hot receivers. Don't see him having another huge game just because of the matchup, but rather it's going to be those outside guys like a Van Jefferson, maybe Deshaun Jackson on a deep shot at some point, where they can come up with a couple of big plays and overcome this Arizona team. And I see the Rams ultimately pulling away 28-23. After what I saw from this crowd last week when they were facing the Bucs, that's definitely a home field advantage all of a sudden now. And that could make the difference here because LA was definitely a better team last year. I would still think that they are more balanced overall as a squad, and just having that home crowd there, that's going to add a couple of points here that I would have otherwise made it tighter potentially. But given the Rams winning by 5, and with that, we get to the 425 games, which the first one here is the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Green Bay Packers, 1-2 at 2-1. Packers favored by 6.5, over under set at 45.5. And man, I could not feel more different about two teams coming into this week. Week 1 seems months away for both of them now, as the Bills have since lit up the last two opponents after losing to the Steelers, and the Packers went from getting dominated by the Saints to just having won a huge battle at San Francisco and showing the ability to match the Niners physically. The Steelers' offense has been dreadful so far, scoring just 44 total points on the season if you don't count the blocked punt touchdown in Week 1, while the defense has been banged up, and the Packers have now been getting into a great groove under Matt LaFleur offensively, with a few big plays by the defense being sprinkled in. As far as the Steelers' offense goes, Big Ben targeting his running back 19 times this past Sunday pretty much tells you the whole story for them. It's a ton of dump-offs underneath, not really any big-time throws down the field, which Big Ben at this point of his career is really incapable of, not being able to move around the pockets or really challenge defenses vertically. And then averaging a league low 3.2 yards per attempt on the ground, that's definitely not a good combination. The Pittsburgh defense has been holding down their end of the deal, I would say, even though they have been banged up and just on the field a whole lot. While for the Packers, Week 1 definitely happened, and I think the better defenses that have the game plan for this offense, where they can make them one-dimensional and force those secondary weapons to beat them to some degree, can have some success. But I like the balance that they have shown. While on defense, they have made a few big plays, but they did get 3 sacks on the 49ers and pressured Jimmy Garoppolo a career-high 10 times on Sunday, which was big for them to get those turnovers and really get the ball rolling. But the one statistic that really stands out to me, they have allowed their opponents to convert all 10 of their red zone possessions into touchdowns, and they have by far the fewest tackles for loss in the league with only 2. So that's something that they definitely have to pick up on. So when I look at this matchup, these two are really teams that are going in opposite directions, with the Steelers just looking more and more anemic on offense, just no creativity, no explosive plays by the quarterback. Those wide receivers, they've been banged up to some degree as well. The Packers under Joe Barry defensively will be content with just sitting back in quarters coverage and coming up and tackling, while when we turn things around, Aaron Rodgers, his ability to create plays, extend things, and just the balance that they have shown offensively, where he won't allow the Steelers to take over on the defensive line, especially now with TJ Watt. We don't know what's his status. Alex Highsmith as well will even be out there for them. I can't really see Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers allowing those guys to take over the game. Plus, they don't really have a corner to match up against Davante Adams. When they do go into man coverage, whilst in zone, Rodgers and Adams, just that combination, they can dice those things up. So this to me really is one of the bigger mismatches of the week. And I have the Packers winning by double digits here. Packers 27, Steelers 17. Could this be kind of a sandwich spot here for the Packers, where they're just coming off that emotional win at San Francisco and kind of overlook the Steelers team? Sure, to some degree, but the Steelers really offensively so disappointing, and I really don't think they can compete here if the Packers are locked in. So I might be betting the Packers here to win by a touchdown. And that brings us to a final game here in this midday window, with the Baltimore Ravens at 2-1, traveling to Denver to take on the 3-0 Broncos. Broncos favored by 1.5, over-under set at 44. And this should be one of the best under-the-radar games almost of Week 4, which features a Ravens team with two of the grittiest wins of the season, forcing that fumble on Clyde Edwards-Helaire and taking the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football, before seeing Justin Tucker make history with that 66-yard game-winning field goal at Detroit, where the ball bounced like 15 yards off the crossbar and in, and a pretty surprising perfect start for the Broncos on the other end, in which they've outscored their opposition by a league-best 50 points. You can question some of the competition that they faced, but they've certainly taken care of business. For the Ravens offense, their run game has been on a different level through pretty much the entire league, as their 7 runs of 20 plus yards are more than double the next closest team, and they also lead the league with 32% of their run plays leading into first downs. However, only Washington and Jacksonville have converted a lower percentage of the third downs, as they barely cracking that 30 mark. On defense, they have been vulnerable to some big plays, as only 3 other teams have surrendered more plays of 20 plus yards through the air, and they don't really have the guys who can win individually on passing downs, with just 5 sacks on the season so far. For Denver, they have shown great balance offensively, running the ball on nearly 48% of the snaps, and that's not bound to change, with Jerry Jeudy missing some time and KJ Hamler unfortunately being ruled out for the rest of the season. The Broncos have converted all 5 of the fourth down attempts on the season, and they're averaging 3 minutes and 40 seconds per drive, which is the most in the NFL. The Broncos have converted all 5 of the fourth down attempts on the year. Defensively, they have surrendered just 26 points on the season through those 3 games, and they're tied with the Panthers with just 4.3 yards allowed per dropback. So right off the bat, what it really comes down to for me, the Ravens in the pass game, Lamar Jackson, he's very underrated at this point as a pocket passer. You look at some of the throws that he made, extending plays and then placing the ball in the perfect spots. This past Sunday at Detroit, he's somebody who doesn't nearly get the credit that he deserves. But just the weaponry, I don't really see anybody making big plays. Hollywood Brown is dropping big touchdowns down the field. They don't have any guys that can really create with the ball in the hands. That's the issue that I see with the Ravens right now. But with the Broncos defensively, I don't see them being a team that can really take away the run game and put the game in Lamar's hands as a passer. And then as well, when Lamar gets involved on scrambles against those linebackers, there's a speed deficit where he can make big plays if that's the second line of defense and there's nobody really watching out for him. While when we flip things around, the issue for the Broncos here, with those injuries to the wide receiver position, their major target in the pass game in the wide receiver position, now Cortland Sutton, I think with Marlon Humphrey we have somebody at the cornerback position who can really match him one-on-one throughout the game, where they don't have those secondary pieces to make big plays for them, with Noah Fant being the one guy that has a pretty good matchup, because those Ravens linebackers, they're still pretty young and have the issues in pass coverage. But that's certainly something that I want to see still. Do the Broncos have more creative ways to attack this Ravens defense? And can they punish some of those younger defensive backs if they put in man coverage situations for Baltimore? I expect this game to go into the fourth quarter, and it could really go either way. But I went with the Ravens winning this one 23-22, simply because Lamar Jackson, comparing him to Teddy Bridgewater, the things that they can create individually, I just think Lamar brings more to the table, and those 1 or 2 big plays on third downs, that is gonna make the difference here for Baltimore. So grabbing them plus 1.5 in a game that can come down to the final kick, going either way, and the Ravens having Justin Tucker, who we just saw in the Dome, and now he's at Mile High, might set a new personal record, who knows. In those situations, I'm just gonna trust the Ravens. And that brings us to Sunday Night Football. The 2-1 Buccaneers at the 1-2 New England Patriots. Bucks favored by 6.5, total set at 49. Well, I'm not sure if there's any significant storylines to discuss. Oh wait, I forgot the Bucks now have this guy who played for the Patriots for like 2 decades and won them 6 Lombardi trophies, who's now going back home and trying to show off the guy who was ready to move on from him. My god, if there ever was an all-time quarterback versus coach battle, this one stands above the rest, I would think. Brady and the Bucs would have loved to come in 3-0, but might have seen the biggest challenger for the NFC title this past Sunday, while New England probably should have won Week 1, then demolished the Jets before getting out-executed this past Sunday by the Saints at home, I thought. So the Bucs are now tied with Arizona for the most points scored on the year with 103, as they're constantly attacking defenses vertically, as only the Raiders have more than their 18 pass plays of 20 plus yards. And that's with the Rams last week doing a pretty good job of taking those away. However, the defense has been very disappointing in my opinion, as no other team has given up more first downs or big plays through the air than the Bucs, with some injuries really piling up in the secondary, Sean Murphy bouncing in the slot, those outside corners, both of them I thought getting banged up last week. And they have shockingly only recorded a league low 3 sacks on the season, despite having some superstar pass rushers. On New England's side, they'll have to get the job done here with defense, as their approach as a team is wildly different from the Bucs, playing through that unit and the run game. Jets rookie quarterback Zach Wilson got to experience that defense firsthand a couple of weeks ago when he was picked off 4 times. But you're looking at this offense for the New England Patriots, only 5 other teams average less yards per play, as they want to bring you a heavy dose of Damian Harris and a quick trigger passing attack. But the thing that stands out, they have to be more effective in the red zone, scoring on just 2 of their 8 trips there, because they better not kick field goals if they want to win this game. So in this matchup, it's going to be very interesting to me to see Bill Belichick, which approach is he going to take defensively, because they are a man coverage team that wants to challenge opposing receivers. But in this particular one, with all the weapons that Tampa Bay brings to the table, I'm not sure if that's the right approach for them. So I could see them also show a heavy dose of zone coverage, where they show man pre-snap and then drop out late, force Brady to hold on to the ball and manufacture some pressures with some creative games up front. While when we turn things around, the Patriots are not going to be able to really keep that ground game going up against the Bucs with Vita Vea in the middle there, just how good they've been against the run. It's really going to put the game in Mac Jones' hands, him spreading the field and attacking this defense that wants to play a lot of man coverage. I'm not sure if New England has the pieces to really scare the Bucs out of those looks, but with some leverage advantages, they have some capable receivers, Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers, that are going to keep the sticks moving. I just think Belichick wants to make this a grind-out game, low-scoring affair, but the Bucs, with that firepower that they have, are just going to be a little too much here. Give me Tampa Bay bouncing back 28-19, really showing off Belichick to some degree here, but just having the better team around him at this point. This might be a game where I get involved live, when the Patriots hang around early or even have a lead, betting the Bucs to win it ultimately, the Bucs pulling away late, that might be the way to go here. And that brings us to a final game here, Monday Night Football. Another awesome one, AFC West battle between the 3-0 Raiders and the 2-1 Chargers. I still don't really get how we can have the Raiders on Monday Night Football twice in a matter of 4 weeks, but I'll take it. Going up against another AFC West team whose only loss came on a last-second field goal at home against the Cowboys in a back-and-forth game. Oh, and that just took down the big dogs in that division. The Raiders are undefeated themselves with a clutch overtime win against Baltimore, and another one at Pittsburgh that may not look quite as impressive at this point, but still was big for them. And then they showed a ton of perseverance, overcoming a horrible start against Miami that really fought them tooth and nails. Right now, Derek Carr leads the league in passing yards, and what I love, it's not just dumping the ball off underneath. His 21 throws of 20 plus yards are also number 1 in the league, with Henry Ruggs getting more and more involved in the offense, Bryan Edwards making some big catches at the end of games, and Carr just coming up clutch when his team needs him. Defensively, they've gone from near the bottom pretty much across the board to top 10 in yards per play and points per drive, which are really the 2 stats that matter the most to me almost. And Max Crosby has been a stud for them, while overall, I thought the hustle to the ball has looked much better this season. On the Chargers end, they haven't just blown away people with big plays through the air as much as they did last year maybe, but only the Chiefs convert a higher percentage of their third downs at just under 55%, and they've just been very efficient overall. The defense has had its issues stopping the run, surrendering a league worst 5.8 yards per carry, but they've only given up 5 passes of 20 plus yards, and they've been very opportunistic with 6 takeaways on the year, which were a big reason why they won at Kansas City. For them, it's just been mental mistakes and penalties that have been killers for them. Just thinking of a couple of touchdowns being taken off the board at Dallas. It almost cost them last week against the Chiefs, but Herbert and that offense somehow being able to overcome that. This could really decide who's going to be that team that challenges the Chiefs for that division ultimately, because I still see Kansas City bouncing back and being the favorite to win this thing. They have the offenses to match Kansas City to some degree, and then the defenses have that opportunistic gene to make things happen in the clutch. Looking at the Raiders in the past game this week, with the Chargers, they have the guys on the back end to erase some of those big plays, with Derwin James as a guy that you can deploy in different areas, and Asante Samuel Jr. on the outside, his speed to carry things vertically and that ability to make plays on the ball down the field, which we've already seen end up with 2 interceptions for him, as well as the Raiders just not having been able to run the ball consistently. I think they're averaging still only like 3.4 yards per carry or something like that on the season, and Josh Jacobs, we don't know about his status for this upcoming game. And as we flip things around, the Raiders do play a lot of zone coverage, which Justin Herbert has shown a great ability to grow as a young player and make those plays against zone coverage, find those open spots, especially on third downs. Him and Keenan Allen just having that magical connection, and Mike Williams as the guy on the outside who can make things happen down the field. I've been very impressed with these Chargers. They've just kind of been hurting themselves, but if they don't do that, I think they're going to win this game. So give me LA winning 27-23 in a highly entertaining matchup. And that's going to do it. All 16 games predicted once again. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with a couple of friends to get them ready for week 4. And let me know what you think of these predictions, where you agree or disagree. Do you enjoy this information that I give here, which is really what it's all about? And maybe if there's something that you want me to change, I'll be back next week, not here on YouTube however, but on my page at Footballtalk.com with my first in-season power rankings, since we're about a quarter of the way in now at this point and should have a pretty good feel for where these teams stand. Make sure to check in for that, and of course all my social media handles that are at the bottom here as well, if you want to know my opinion on a bunch of topics around the league, as well as check out my weekly video breakdowns of one of the plays that stood out to me from the weekend. So until then, see you later. Peace!